With the latest business, economic and market reports from the world's financial centres in World Business Report.
Calls for coordination are rejected. Federal Reserve officials say they only care about the health of the US economy and confirm they will not consider the impact their economic policies are having on other markets around the world. More money, but no more austerity as a third Greek bailout looks more likely. The country's finance minister tries to play hardball. A very warm welcome to you. This is World Business Report with me, Alice Baxter. Now, in just a minute, we'll have more on how the Eurozone will deal with renewed calls for a third Greek bailout. But first this hour, despite the beautiful backdrop of the Jackson Hole Mountains, disagreement and divisions. That was actually the order of the day in Jackson Hole after Federal Reserve officials rebuffed calls to coordinate with their emerging market neighbours. Well, after a turbulent week which saw stock markets in the developing world tumble, there are increasing calls for the US to discuss with other nations how it plans to rein in its $85 billion a month stimulus package. But over the weekend, Federal Reserve officials rejected calls to consider the impact that their tapering plan could have on the emerging markets. Instead, senior Fed officials declared that their mandate was to consider the health of the American economy only. Now, the US decision to not commit to any unified program at this stage has already resulted in a backlash from officials in Mexico, Turkey, South Africa and India. Even the head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, has called for caution, saying the Federal Reserve shouldn't rush any changes to its stimulus program. Well, earlier I spoke to Pippa Malmgren of Principalis, and I started by asking her, is the Federal Reserve being fair by refusing to help their emerging market neighbours?
Well, that's always been the situation with monetary policy. It's always about your own domestic economy. But I think what's important is the attitude of the Federal Reserve is that emerging markets could have managed the hot money inflows that came with quantitative easing by letting their currencies appreciate and by pushing interest rates up, and they chose not to do that. So now when the hot money goes out, when quantitative easing goes away, they can't really complain, is the basic view.
And yet, was there no sense that some sort of a unified approach could be taken? Yes, perhaps the responsibility lies on those economies themselves, but surely a more coherent policy could be taken.
No, absolutely no discussion, and there won't be any discussion on that front. And the Fed, just to be clear about where they stand, I mean, everybody talks about tapering, but one of the Fed presidents put it this way. He said, you know, the tradition is that the role of the Federal Reserve is to take the punch bowl away from the party before everybody gets too drunk, and that what the Fed is doing with tapering is adding alcohol a little less rapidly. That is what tapering is, right? So they're not taking anything away. And if the emerging markets are already going to get in a twist over this, then we have a lot more to come. And the Let's get ready.
So the analogy of us all slowly being eased off our alcohol dependence. And yet, is the Fed in any way being affected by these calls for caution from not only central banks from emerging markets around the world, including Mexico, Turkey, etc., but also from Christine Lagarde herself?
Well, I think, to be clear, everybody understands emerging markets are going to have a bumpy time, but it's not exclusively because of U.S. monetary policy. Some of it is to do with the fact that Japan has doubled the monetary base, which has created new competitive problems, for example, for all of South Asia, because the yen has fallen and that has rendered them less competitive. So it's not only about the Federal Reserve.
And Pippa, finally, if you had to place money on who's going to replace Ben Bernanke come January, who would your money be on?
I have to say, it looks like Larry Summers, even though he's considered a very tricky and controversial choice, and everyone expects he may be one of the least collegial chairmen we've ever had. Nonetheless, it looks like that is where the president is leaning right now.
Pippa Malmgren there of Principales talking to me fresh out of Jackson Hole. Now, more money, but no more austerity. That was the call from the Greek finance minister this weekend. Yanis Stournaras announced that he thinks Greece might need another $13 billion in assistance, but that any new funds should not have strict conditionality tied to them. Well, his call for further funds comes just a month after the IMF said that Greece would actually need around $14 billion as soon as next year. But with elections looming in Germany and several other Eurozone countries struggling to ignite economic growth back at home, how forthcoming is more rescue money likely to be? Well, David Buick from Panmure Gordon says that he thinks Mr. Stournaras will get his $13 billion.
Greece has tried to deliver austerity, but never had a cat in hell's chance of being able to do it to the full. I think the one thing that they've let the Troika down, which is the three, the ECB, the European Union and the IMF, is that they haven't sold assets, which they promised they would do. And I think if there'd been more evidence of that happening, there wouldn't be perhaps the hullabaloo, because they have delivered an enormous level of austerity, but it just simply isn't enough. But as we know, as Mario Draghi has said, we'll do everything that we have to do. And when you think of the big picture, to suddenly say you can't have another 10 billion unless you do deliver more austerity, it seems a little bit trifling. So at the end of the day, the Germans, once their election's over next month, because they've been driving this forward and they're insistent on no haircuts, I'm certain as long as night follows day, they're going to pick up the tab in a year or two's time.
David Buick there on the hullabaloo surrounding Greece. Now, plenty of us are used to pay-as-you-go mobile phones, free from lengthy contracts or tie-in deals. But what about taking the pay-as-you-go concept to other parts of your life? Well, new companies are springing up around the world, offering us the chance to share goods and services or just rent them by the day or by the hour. But does a pay-as-you-go life really save you money in the long run? Susanna Street has been finding out.
It's new, shiny, there's plenty of fuel and it's fully insured. And it's my motor for a few hours. Zipcar is one of a range of car-sharing clubs now in business. For people who can't or simply don't want to pay the upfront costs of a car of their own, you can rent one instead from £5 an hour. This council-run leisure centre here in West London is signed up to a nationwide pay-as-you-go gym network aimed at those people who don't want to be tied into those 12-month contracts. Hundreds of gyms link into the website portal, and the internet has also helped bring pay-as-you-go dress hire back into fashion. Girl Meets Dress hires out around 30 frocks a day.
Demand for this service has grown so much. We're growing over 100% year on year, and women love this concept. It means they can rent their dream designer dresses that they otherwise wouldn't be able to wear, and who wants to wear a dress more than once anyway?
A study by the research group The Future Foundation has shown why these startups are becoming more popular. It found that nearly 70% of people say they've actively avoided products where contractors tied them in for a long time.
This, I think it's fair to say, is a truly global phenomenon. We've been picking up examples from all over the place. In France, you can rent out your washing machine. In Mexico City, you can hire a living Christmas tree for a couple of months at the end of the year. In the Netherlands, you can rent a pair of jeans for a year. All sorts of products, all sorts of different sectors. We're finding new examples appearing all the time.
But does pay-as-you-go really save money in the long run?
If you're going to a works do, or you've got a whole load of weddings one summer and you want to hire an outfit, then undoubtedly it will save you money compared to buying something designer or high-end. But when it comes to something like, for example, a car, I mean, a lot of people may have a car sitting on their drive most of the week, but then it's there the moment they want it. Hiring or renting a car is definitely cheaper. The question is, will you be able to get the car that you want at the time you want it and where you want it?
It might not always be as convenient, but living pay-as-you-go can free you up from financial commitment. Susanna Streeter, BBC News.
Well, that was Susanna Streeter there, and our series on this new sharing economy continues tomorrow when we'll look at how consumption patterns are changing with the times. Now, some other news to bring you up to speed on. A New York appeals court has ruled that Argentina must pay back more than $1.3 billion to a group of investors 11 years after its record debt default. But Argentina has said it will continue to refuse to pay anything to investors who declined to participate in the previous debt reduction deal. Now Argentina is set to lodge an appeal with the Supreme Court. Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe has threatened tit-for-tat retaliation against Western countries which have imposed sanctions on his administration. The 89-year-old newly re-elected leader accuses the United States and Britain of harassing his government, and he suggested their companies could be targeted. Well, Mr. Mugabe's re-election last month prompted Western doubts about the credibility of the poll. And China Construction Bank has posted its smallest quarterly profit increase in nearly 18 months. The country's second biggest lender saw its income weighed down by rising bad loan charges as the Chinese economy slows. Well, the earnings slowdown reflects the challenges Chinese banks face to keep their lending numbers high whilst trying to maintain the creditworthiness of those it lends to. Quick look to see how markets in Europe have opened today. OK, well, in London, it's a bank holiday, so that is actually the closing figure for Friday, with the FTSE 100 up 0.7%. However, a positively similar picture in Germany and France as well, with the DAX and the CAC both up just over 0.2% this hour. From me and the business team, bye for now this hour.